you to the final event of the day. On behalf of Beacon House, I would like to welcome you to our virtual conference, A World of Tomorrow 2021 and beyond, towards happier futures. I will be the host for this session, and my name is Iain Riley, and I am currently the head of school for TNS Beacon House DHA. Before working for Beacon House, I worked for 11 years in China in multiple leadership roles and have previously worked in Turkey, Egypt, and my home country of Scotland. I'm a workshop facilitator with the International Baccalaureate and an advocate for student agency through our voice, choice, and ownership. We have an amazing group of speakers today, starting with Riaz Kamlani, and I do apologize if I say any of your names wrong. He is the Executive Vice President of the Systems Foundation. Now, Riaz Kamlani has been associated with the Systems Foundation since 2008. He served as the chairperson for the Punjab Examination Commission as a nominee of TCF. He has also been a course director for organisational management at the famous Aga Khan University. Our second guest is Deepanshu Arora. Now, he is the co-founder and CEO of Toddle. Deepanshu Arora is the co-founder and also collaboration. Toddle is a collaborative and productive platform for PYP and MYP, and soon DP, which he didn't mention in this profile. An engineer by background and an educator by passion, he believes that technology has only one role to play in education, that of making teachers' lives easier by helping them do what they do best. Next, we have Sadaf Rahman, who is the co-founder of Codeschool Pk. Sadaf spent 17 years in the non-profit education and skills training space in Pakistan. She is a trained IB teacher with a bachelor's degree in computer science and mathematics and an MBA from LUMS, where she received the NBT Gold Medal for first place overall. Well done, Sadaf. Finally, we have Adrian Kirney. Now, Adrian Kirney is the director of IB World Schools at the International Baccalaureate, tasked with supporting all authorised schools in achieving their optimum learning, teaching and assessment objectives, and providing schools everything they need to get the most out of their IB journey. Adrian, I certainly wouldn't want your job. The title for our panel discussion tonight is From Room to Zoom. The landscape of education has certainly changed, and we will be discussing how students, parents and teachers have had to adapt to what seems to be a new norm for online education. Question: has the global pandemic changed the face of education forever? I look forward to this very fruitful discussion with my esteemed panel. So I would like to start off now with Sadaf. Now, Sadaf, would you say, is it safe to say that the structures we were too comfortable with have changed abruptly and may never go back to the same way again?
100% yes. So I can only speak from the Pakistani experience and from the Codeschool.pk experience. So just a little bit, I mean, if I could just introduce what we do. Codeschool.pk runs online coding classes for children from ages 6 to 13 years. And as a co-founder, my brother and I wanted to really bring the wonder of tech and the wonder of coding back into programs in Pakistan, because ourselves, our childhood, we had very early exposure to tech, and to computers and to coding, and we really wanted to kind of bring that experience to children. Now, what makes us a little unique is that we were born in the pandemic. And so we didn't really need to transition, but we had to become extremely creative to make a new model. And one of the biggest things was that when we were recruiting, there really wasn't a standard proxy that we could use because, experience, who has experience teaching online, in the pandemic, what teacher or what coding teacher would have that kind of experience? Is similarly, education as a proxy. was perhaps somewhat indicative, but the kind of quality of recruitment that was such a bottleneck in a traditional in-person setting forced us to actually look outside of Pakistan. And our first, big recruit was from Germany. We have another instructor all the way down from Cape Town. We've even had instructors from, tier 2 cities, smaller tier 2 cities, and within Pakistan. And so I think that access to a human resource that we wouldn't typically have access to really allowed us to deliver a much better quality program than if we had been in person. Another very big shift from the startup perspective was that our clients, or the parents and the students that we had to that we were selling this to, were actually not just from Lahore or Karachi, but we reached students from 8 different countries. And we exploded a lot faster in the sense that we reached milestones, in half the time that we were expecting, because there was this pendulum swing of health and safety concerns. Everything was locked down, and parents were really looking for online classes that their children could attend. Of course, the pendulum swung the other way, and now everyone does not want online classes because of schools. But I think eventually, when it settles down, there are innumerable benefits of online education, such as accessibility, no pick and drop, and so and the safety and security of getting world-class education in your home means that online education really is here to stay.
Thank you so much for that, Sadaf. Now, I've got to say, it's wonderful to see, a company that's grown through the pandemic, because, of course, so many different companies have had to adapt or change. And this actually leads me really nicely on to 2 different individuals here again. So, Adrian, if I can please pass again this over to you, how, from this room to Zoom concept has really changed, your perspective from a global IB perspective. So, Adrian, please.
Thank you, Iain. I think, first of all, I want to thank you and the team at Beacon House for inviting me. It's a privilege to be part of the event, and thank Beacon House for their commitment and work. And it's also really exciting to be part of the conversation in Pakistan with, we have 31 other IB schools within the country. So I think it's good to see the education being embedded and growing and developing and being nurtured in the country, it's great progress in terms of, I think the first program school was authorized in 1996. So you think about how education can develop and gain momentum. So that's really exciting. And I kind of talk to you as, working for the IB, but also as an IB parent. So I've also kind of experienced the room to Zoom from my son's perspective as an MYP student. So he's an MYP 1. So I've experienced the modality of learning and change that he's been through. I'd also like to thank everyone kind of listening who's been involved in the education, the teachers, the parents, the students, for their commitment to sort of education. I think at this point, we talk about the impact of COVID and room to Zoom, but it's been, Maslow's hierarchy of needs has been one about safety, hasn't it? It's about how do you keep people safe and well, and then you think about the continuity of teaching and learning. So I think first, to thank everybody who's contributed to that and the student success at this really challenging time. So come to the kind of the broad question that you're asking there, and I think, should we go back and what's happening, I think, we've got to build on the innovation, the lessons learned, and continue to adapt. I think something we learn in the good, I think you kind of learn in the good times. What we should do in the good times is get ready for the tough times ahead. And I think now, as we kind of come through COVID, to think, what have we taken from this? How do we continue to, further innovate and develop? I think in IB education, in a way has been impacted, but also the framework and flexibility within the programs, the focus on teacher agency, student agency, helps give the education a form of resilience, I would hope. So I think the holistic nature of the education, the focus on the learner, transdisciplinarity, projects, creativity, action and support, all of these kind of things coming together mean that I suppose the environment has been not just the classroom and online, but it's the school, it's the home, it's the community, and all of these things connected worldwide, particularly through the use of technology, which we've seen to have really been increased. COVID, has been a fantastic kind of catalyst, but the impact has been very dramatic, and we're concerned about equity and learning loss through this time. When you think that in 2020, I think 1.6 billion kids were out of education, formal education, as school systems sort of closed everywhere. So when we look at schools and look at systems worldwide, and I've got the privilege of sort of working and supporting schools around the world, I think we've really seen it speeded up the trends that were latent before. It's been an accelerator as COVID. This is what we've seen in terms of innovation. I think it's made clear how some things have been outdated and some aspects irrelevant, but also it's been an opportunity to reshape and revolutionize really the thinking around education. So I would say at this point, what we should do is continue that conversation, think about how we can continue to reconstruct the school day with a greater emphasis on themes, concepts, and less about heavy curriculum.
You come out with some really interesting points there, and I think this will actually guide a lot of where we're going to go. Now, you mentioned that so many kids, 1.6 billion you mentioned, have not been attending school, which is a very, very large number of individuals. Now, of course, this will lead to a learning loss, shall we say, for many students globally. So, Riaz, if I can ask, from a Pakistan perspective, because we have, again, a unique perspective here in Pakistan, what effect is that going to have on the country here as a whole? Okay, I think Riaz is having internet connections here at the moment. So let me ask, because also, of course, with the new variant, well, there's many global variants here at the moment. Of course, I was stuck in the UK when the UK had their two new variants. And of course, it's been the same thing for you, Deep, within India at the moment. Now, with your company, with Toddle, now I know that also they have done a lot to actually transform the face of education in terms of supporting teachers with their development and with their planning. Now, tell me more about how this has affected, Toddle as your business, and where's it going in the future?
Thanks, Iain, for having me here. So before I talk about Toddle, just adding to Adrian's point, he mentioned that there are a lot of students around the world who do not have access to technology at this point of time. And on the flip side, though, I was just reading a report a couple of months back which mentioned access to education technology, and where access to technology in education is defined as a function of two things. One is access to devices for teachers and students, and the second is access to internet, right? It's a combined function of the two. If we were to define access to technology in education, in 5 years prior to COVID, it increased by 130%. And since COVID has happened in the first 13 to 14 months of COVID, it has increased by 370%. So usually what would have taken 15 years to happen has actually happened in the span of less than a year. And I think there are a lot of interesting things happen on top of this access that has been created once we go back to school as well. I think the topic of this is from room to Zoom, and I'm just hoping that when we go back from Zoom to room, we don't forget that there is a thing called Zoom, and it becomes Zoom in the room, right? And that is what will lead to really interesting models of education. Now, coming to what in the way things have impacted our company or the work that we do. Just to give some background, before founding Toddle, I actually co-founded a network of preschools in India, which are called Toddlers Den, which are IBPYP and which are Regio inspired. The name Toddle actually derives from Toddlers Den. Since it was an in-house tool that we had built originally as a passion project, and there was one point in time where we had to put our app on the App Store to give our parents access to it. We had to come up with a name. So then we decided that, okay, Toddle sounds like a good name because it has been built at Toddlers, and not a lot of thought was given to the name at that point of time. And originally it was built as an in-school teaching learning solution because that's the context with which we were operating. Then last February, as we started seeing a lot of our partner schools move to remote learning, our product roadmap, like all technology companies have product roadmaps, right? As Sadaf would agree that you have a 6-8 month roadmap that this is what we are going to build in the coming few months. That kind of changed overnight because we knew that, okay, this is spreading and this is going to stay. And we realized that for all of our partner schools, the needs were now that how can we communicate with our students and families effectively in a remote setting, and what are the kind of tools that teachers can have to be able to interact with their students in a meaningful way, like almost as good as it would be in a classroom context. That's what has changed for us. And for the last 1 year, the focus has just been on building features which will help teachers do that. We were actually about to launch our MYP platform much earlier than we did. It was supposed to happen last June, but then because of COVID, it ended up happening only in December.
No, thank you for that. Now, I think it has been incredible, how so many companies around the world have come together to offer free support to schools, as Zoom did for a long time, to actually support the growth of technology. Now, I'm a firm believer of the growth of technology within 21st century skills, which is now part of the new IB standards and practices as well. Now, Sadaf, one question here would be, with the growth of technology or the growth of the technology market within Pakistan, what impact is that going to have on the changing face of education within Pakistan? Because I've just joined an EduTech Pakistan group, which I know you're in as well, which has all these companies from around the world set up by Pakistanis to give back to Pakistan, which I think is incredible. Please.
Absolutely. I think while great strides have been made, we can't ignore the fact that we still have a very long way to go. And so there are vast swaths of society that simply do not have access to tech, do not have access to internet, do not even have access to cell phones. And that profoundly cuts off a huge segment of the population. And getting to them, that last mile connectivity, is something that I know a lot of organizations have tried, but there isn't really one model that has worked successfully because there are so many obstacles that come in the way. However, within that context, I think what there has been an acknowledgement on is understanding things like internet is not a luxury, it's a utility, right? That a tool for a child, whereas traditionally, a laptop was not considered the norm to be given to a child, or an iPad was something that was something luxurious, like a luxurious toy that they could perhaps get at, if they behave well. But these are now standard fare, and they are needed for every child in the house. And I think that is something that we're right at the beginning of that awakening of how important technology really is in our interaction with the world. Another piece, I think, that Pakistan is a little behind the curve is understanding just how critical coding is in the standard education fare. I've been talking to so many schools, both low cost schools as well as elite schools across the spectrum of fee. And there is this perhaps understanding that yes, coding is something, it's important, it needs to be implemented, but not really that concrete a clarity on, all right, this is such a vital tool for our children. We're 10 or 15 years behind, behind the curve. And these are the steps that must get implemented yesterday. And sometimes we're focusing so much on the lack of access that perhaps the kids that do have access, the path for them to coding is perhaps not as chartered out as it should be.
Thank you for that, Sadaf, and I agree. Now, with Riaz, I'll go back to the original question that I was asking before. Of course, we all have internet issues. Now, as we said before, Adrian rightfully said there's been 1.6 billion students out of the classroom. Now, not all at the same time, it's been staggered. Now, do you believe that has led to a learning loss? Because, for example, when I was in China, I know that they streamed live, lessons to the students on a daily basis. And I know this has also been happening in Pakistan. So they've been trying to deal with this. But do you think having so many kids out of the classroom is leading to a learning loss, and what should we be doing about it?
Thank you. And I hope now I'm loud and clear. I think technology issues are something we've experienced consistently over the last 15 years around the world. So, there we are. To your question, the answer on learning loss is absolutely. As was said, that there are 1.6 billion children who've been affected. And I would say that a vast majority of them are in the global south. And there, when we talk about a transition from room to Zoom, in a country like Pakistan in particular, but in developing countries in general, that's for the exception. That's not for the norm. So in Pakistan's case, let's just get the dimensions of the issue right. There are 50 million children of school-going age in Pakistan. 28 million are in school, 22 million are out of school. For the out of school, this is meaningless. They don't have the inside of a school. They don't have no access to technology. For the 28 million in school, there are a vast majority, over 300,000 schools, which are either in the low fee sector or in the government sector. And there, again, Zoom is not a reality. What you do find there, even the latest survey says 93% of the households have a mobile phone access. Most of them are not a smartphone. For most of them, that is a single mobile phone that might be available to a child maybe at the tail end of a day. So just as for our children, we see a transition from, let's say, a classroom to a Zoom room, which is completely seamless now. For a vast majority of children in the global south and in Pakistan, that's not a reality. What's the answer? I think the answer firstly lies in the fact that as educators, our expanse of thinking should be beyond what immediately lies adjacent to us, where solutions are possible. Should we implement those solutions where they are possible? Absolutely. Should we imagine that solution somehow miraculously applies to the largest sum? No, it doesn't. And we should be clear-eyed about that. The second thing I would say, technology does not mean Zoom only. What global experience tells you, from civil war zones to famine-ridden zones, is that when it comes to technology, there's a whole spectrum. Brian has done wonderful work through radio-based education. In Pakistan, you mentioned, Iain, Pakistan government started off this TV program. At TCF, because the largest majority of our children don't have technology access, we searched and programming of our own. So with the Pakistani government, we did early childhood education on TV, which was a thematic early childhood program. What research told us was that magazines, which are self-led form of learning, where scaffolded education can be provided, overnight, literally in a period of, let's say, 3 weeks, we produced magazines at a mass level to reach every child across the country in the TCF network and to many other schools otherwise. Small community groups were structured so that children, because of social distancing, who cannot go to the classroom, can get together in the foyer of a household in a group of 5 or 6, and with a local volunteer, with some technology assistance such as a chatbot, which could help communicate so that the children can, through a local facilitator, benefit from some kind of education continuation. So I think these are the kind of experiments that also need to be brought into play. Technology, I would simply end by saying, as educators, let's be clear, just Zoom or a tablet in every child's hand or a laptop in every child's hand is wonderful, but that's not the only technology-based solution. The solutions lie from radio to chatbots to magazines to a whole raft of things that can be done.
Thank you so much for that really detailed answer. And actually, it's again opened up so many different questions in my mind that I want to, actually ask. Now, let me just go one last for Sadaf at the moment. Then I need to go for another controversial question with Adrian. So Sadaf, this morning, there was a great discussion with some quite famous individuals about the introduction of the single national curriculum. Okay, now with the single national curriculum, some people love it, some people hate it. Now, we're not here to give viewpoints on this at the moment. What I would say to you, though, is do you think it is the right time to actually implement the single national curriculum during a global pandemic?
So, in the interest of full disclosure, I was a private sector advisor to the single national curriculum for middle school. And within my purview, I was advocating for coding to be introduced into the middle school curriculum. I think we have to realize that the curriculum document is going to outlive the pandemic and something short term. Implementation issues aside, this is something that we need to plan not just for the next 1 year, 2 year, 5 years. I mean, we last had a curriculum document, I think, a decade ago. And so we really need to make sure that we get whatever it is that we're planning right, not just for right now, but for the next 10 years. And that is a lot of weight on one, on one institution or one document or one plan. But it is what it is. I think if I had a personal opinion, yes, it might not have been the ideal time, but I think we've seen with all the regime changes, with all the new initiatives that get started and get ended, that perhaps, it now is as good a time as any, perhaps.
It's a very difficult question. Now, Riaz, let me just go with you on this one as well, very quickly. Because if we think about teachers, now I'm an educator. I started off as a teacher and worked my way up to head of school. So I still support, the teachers, as does Deep, as does Adrian, as does everyone here. Is this not adding additional pressure to teachers during this really difficult time who are about to return back into the classroom, have their summers shortened after the Education Minister announced that last night? What's your thoughts on that then?
So, yes, I think it's not an ideal time. The initiative predates the whole pandemic that we've had. And again, as TCA, we've also had a role partly at the initial stages of the national curriculum development. So yeah, I think from a teacher's perspective, coming back in and going through another set of textbooks, because honestly, I think for a lot of teachers in the public sector and the low-fee private schools, the curriculum document is something that they probably haven't seen and probably won't see. What they would end up seeing is a new set of textbooks. And that is an encumbrance. That's something that perhaps one could do without. But as Sadaf said, I think there is a conversation for the political governments only have 5 years. And if you want to do something, then there is a certain point in time in which something like this would be possible. I think it's a longer conversation on the direction the single national curriculum is taking. But I think timing-wise, perhaps, despite the fact that it's a pandemic, if you really want to implement 1 to 5 right now, then this is probably the window.
No, thank you. And I know, there was quite a bit of discussion going to start on that, which never really happened. So it's quite interesting to take it forward. Now, one of the other controversial things that's been happening globally at the moment, and I'm going to ask Adrian about this as well, and then Deep, also your point of view on the same question. Okay. Now, of course, Pakistan and India are both known very much so for the A-level, O-level system. And it's growing now. The IB is growing in both countries. I've seen the significant growth in India, and it's growing again, of course, in Pakistan. So one of the issues that we had last year was from my perspective, the IB exams. Now, of course, the IB has done a lot of work on that this year to rectify that situation. And I know that they've also had issues with the Pakistan federal government. So, Adrian, can you tell me what the IB has done globally first to support schools with the exams, what they maybe could have done better, and also, what is your viewpoint with the students who are doing A-level that have been left to wait now only until July for O-levels, which was announced yesterday, or November for different subjects? What's your view on this?
Okay, so I'd like to link this back to the earlier point about lost learning as well, because there's also an element of sort of how we focus learning. So the aspect of lost learning in terms of understanding both the distribution of the loss, across the school, and also the depth of the loss if you're looking at it from particular subjects, and obviously keeping a very close eye in terms of social emotional well-being of the students. But the danger of thinking about lost learning is it's just a catch up to get as much content through as possible, and catch up on all of that content, rather than thinking, and this was the approach that we took to the assessments here, and this is a sort of segue into it in terms of saying, how do we provide the guidance and adaptations needed for schools to be able to teach with greater focus, help them to personalize the learning more for their students. So that's been our focus, and we've thought about the impact of COVID on assessment, and we look at 2020. So by the end of February 2020, then essentially COVID had closed all of those school systems, and in 2020 we were forced to cancel all of the exams. I think it was March 22nd of 2020, all of the exams were cancelled, and then to award grades according to, now fortunately the IB is in a strong position of having internal assessments and predicted grades from schools. So we have evidence of student performance, and students are working on projects, collaborative work for a period of time, which gives us sort of strong evidence. So the adaptations in place, and what we've done, Iain, over time from, I think the assessment team in IB had about 4 months from the cancellation of the exams, developing everything to come up with a new system to award grades, because we wanted to ensure that no student was left behind and was not getting fair grades. Then for November 21, we have, for the Southern Hemisphere schools in particular, we developed the dual route system. So there we've been working really to support schools worldwide in terms of, is it safe to administer the examinations? Are you able to do it? That's been our focus. And where they're able to sit and administer the exams, we've supported them doing it. Where not, we've offered the alternative non-examination route. And we've really worked with much greater sophistication on the predicted grades and also on the coursework as we go towards May 21. So I think, I think the learning, so what could you have done better, which is a really interesting question. So what we've tried to do is phase the communications and the support. My team, and I'm really privileged with the experts that I work with, their role has been having country and school meetings to talk about the changes, the communications. I think so much of the change is about helping people to understand what's coming and how to successfully respond and embed that change. There's an old adage which is, to change anything, you have to change it twice. You have to make the change in the system, then your stakeholder needs to understand that change and respond to it effectively. Then you've done something. So what we've done in a way is, I think IB has been working in a hybrid model. So there's been communications coming from the centre, we've had stuff online in terms of resources, guidance, adaptations, then it's been teams of people working with schools and meeting with them to talk about those changes. As we go through, I guess, in the communication and the change, what we've done, the level of change momentum has been huge. And I think in the old paradigm pre-COVID, just take one of those things, there'd probably been a 3-year pilot before we'd have said we're safe to go global with it, right? So we've really had to change the way that we're structured, the way that we work globally, really think through the data and information needed to make good decision-making globally, be connected to the schools, and be prepared to pivot and change as needed as we've gone through this. So, that's been the approach, and we'll continue to make further refinements. Interestingly, when we surveyed schools worldwide in January of this year, would they be able to administer the exams in May, bearing in mind COVID, 70% said they believe they would. And I think it's so sad that, COVID, the variants you mentioned, have continued, the third wave has continued to impact so many countries. But I was pleased, the exams have just taken place, that it was 50% of schools worldwide, on average, were able to administer the exams. It's been a very uneven picture. So, Asia Pacific has been higher. The lowest region in terms of take-up has been Latin America, with only 8%, I think, of schools able to administer. So quite different. I think when it comes to other systems, it's difficult for me to talk about other systems. I think the thing is providing clarity as to what's required and trying to give certainty as quickly as possible to schools to work with their communities and students as to what's expected. But it's been so fluid and it's been so open. It's just trying to understand and work through uncertainty. So the lessons learned file behind me is big, it's fat, it's growing, and we're reviewing it, really seriously. I'm really thinking that through this, particularly the work on schools have done in providing predicted grades and evidence has really helped us join up as closer understanding of the important points and quality of education. So we're certainly going to use this to help drive forward our understanding of what is great IB education and how we can support schools further in achieving it.
I'm going to take 3 words from that, really, which is flexibility, adaptability, and communication. And I think this is key to how the world needs to move forward more in the future. Now, Deep, with you in India, now, of course, you've just had a new variant, and of course, that's closed down most of India very, very quickly. One of my colleagues was doing an IB accreditation visit for a new school in India, and on day 2 of the accreditation, India got shut down. So it has had an impact. So tell me, how has, this very, let's say, horrible pandemic had an impact at the moment in India from your perspective?
Yeah, so India is, at this point of time, probably the country that has been impacted the most, right, in terms of the number of cases that we have seen. And also, I think we are now on top of the chart. It's not a good chart to be on top of, but I think we are on top of the chart in terms of the number of COVID-related deaths also that the country has seen. We have had 2 waves. The first wave was last year, and around December, January, everyone thought that the worst is behind us, and it led to a lot of lethargy on everyone's part, whether it be the institutions, the government, the citizens as well, when it came to taking due precautions. And because of that, in March, suddenly we saw that there was another big wave that hit us. Thankfully now, I think again, the worst of the second wave is behind us. 2 weeks back, the number of cases started going down pretty fast. And now we're at a place where we are seeing, at the peak, it was about 400,000 cases a day. Now we're at about 150,000 cases a day. So the situation is much better. And the healthcare system seems to be now operating at capacity. Earlier, it was just not possible for people to get hospital beds, oxygen. So it was a really tough time. And very much like Riaz mentioned, like Sadaf mentioned, India also, just like Pakistan, the problem of access is humongous, right? So India has the largest population of school-going children in the world, and 75% of those do not have access to any kind of internet. Even though the internet penetration in the country has increased significantly over the last few years, but even then, like a large part of the country remains underserved. So the kind of echelons that we operate in, obviously people have found a way around it, and people have come up with innovative models to be able to serve their children on a continuous basis. But the real problem lies somewhere else, and that is something that nobody really seems to be addressing. And for me, that's really the disheartening part in this entire equation.
No, I think, this has also been a time for unity, collaboration, and change. I think I'm trying to get all the IB learner profiles and concepts into one evening. Riaz, a question for you that's actually come up from one of the viewers, which I think is quite important in the context that's happening at the moment, because there's been a lot of outcry about exams, especially A-level and O-level, which is more established in Pakistan at the moment. Now, one of my questions would be, why are exams so important during the time of a global pandemic? Is there not a different way that we can actually assess children or use predicted grades, use different ways from, the Pakistan perspective, where it is very much exam-centric? What's your thoughts on that?
So I think what you said regarding an alternate, it absolutely makes complete sense. But the question will be, is that alternate available? So let's look at the Pakistani context. When you talk about O-level, A-level examinations, there are about 85,000 kids across the country who appear for that. When it comes to our main public sector systems, the metric system and the intermediate systems, you're talking about hundreds and thousands of children, over 1 million kids who appear. There we don't have an alternate. So when you talk about predicted grades for children going into the IB system or going to the O-level, A-level system, there is a structure of examinations, of term tests and of portfolios, let's say, formative assessments as well, through which you can come up with a school-based assessment which is fair, reasonably consistent and reliable. For a public school in the middle of nowhere, whether it's a primary school or a secondary or a middle school, no such system exists. A consistent variable that plays a part, and again, even in the best of times plays a less than perfect part, is the metric system, is the examination. So I think the discourse is really, it's to my mind, and the government hasn't been articulated this way, but I think my sense is that you may have an optional A-levels, but larger system of the matriculation bit, you don't have an alternate. And because you don't have an alternate, therefore you must have examinations. Were there to be an alternate that would be evolved, and I think that ought to be an area of focus, an area of reflection, an area of focus, that were the situation or a similar situation rise again, we must have a school-based alternate. And the boards who are working on it, this should be something to actively pursue. We have an alternate.
No, that's actually really interesting there, and very valid points. Now, one of the things I would like to actually ask, because we all talk about 21st century skills, we talk about it in, IGCSE, O-level, A-level, we talk about it in the IB with the approaches to learning, and of course, it can be taken so many different ways. Now, what ATLs or what skills, 21st century skills, do you think have been lost due to this online learning and not having the interaction from within the school community? Let me go with Sadaf first on that.
That's a really tough question.
I know.
I think from my perspective as a parent, I can comment on how there has been a profound loss in not just certain 21st century skills, but just in learning in general from switching to an online format. It has its limitations. There are obviously a lot of benefits, such as the ones that I'd mentioned in terms of getting access to better quality teachers. You can have a child sitting in the same classroom. In fact, we've had kids from different continents, in the same classroom, and that diversity really kind of encourages some wonderful relationships and conversations that wouldn't be possible. But at the heart of it, for younger children in particular, I think online learning is a struggle, as everyone knows across the board. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But within 21st century skills and within coding in particular, coding by itself promotes resilience, it promotes critical thinking, it promotes problem-solving ability, because you're given a prompt and you have to code for a solution, and there's no one solution. There may be, 5 different ways of getting to the same outcome. And so coding really as a tool or as a medium is wonderful in promoting 21st century skills. The biggest struggle we faced was in trying to stick to the prompt-based coding and not devolving into syntax and therefore rote learning. And it is such a tricky balance, whether it's online or whether it's in person. And really, it is a tremendous, constant, relentless push, coaching, in-person, training. It's just, at the heart of it, it's a lot of, it has to be a conscious, active decision on the part of the teacher and anyone observing them or anyone involved in the education space.
No, thank you for that. And it was a really difficult question. Now I'm going to give a really difficult question to Adrian as well, because I don't get to speak to him so often. And the IB World Schools Director deserves it. So now, Adrian, we know that online learning is a reality. Okay, there's no getting away from it. With the numbers going up across the globe, with different variants, etc. How do schools or how do organizations gauge the effectiveness of online teaching? And how much, and I'll add on to this as well, how do we gauge the learning loss that the children are also seeing?
Maybe I'll I'll start with that latter point. It's been very interesting hearing the kind of fellow panelists, and it's a very challenging question, to try and assess and understand learning loss. I think, you've got one aspect is, knowledge, content. Another relates to skills. And then you've got, really down to the individual, it can come down to a loss of confidence. You've got, that it's very personal, and, just hearing the comments there, it depends on grades, and particularly younger learners have been more impacted in many cases, but the lack of confidence and perhaps, a shift or a loss in learning habits and just regular school days. So the dislocation it's difficult to identify and track, but I think that, I think IB schools are in a good position in that, they have the standards and practices. You think about, well, what makes an IB school in terms of the environment and the framework. So the standards and practices holistically work together to provide the learning environment for the student and student-focused learning. We put great deal of trust and faith in the teacher, and the teachers who are trained, who are extended, who understand their students, understand what they're trying to teach and the context. And I think, then you've got those things which are in play, and the adaptations of thinking, well, what's important, how should things be taught? And then you kind of come down to, well, let's think about how we can build on the different modalities and what we can learn from the post-COVID situation, and how we can kind of extend technology but not be too reliant on it. I mean, I'm going to be controversial to the other panelists. I saw a meme, I think it was on Facebook, and it was a laptop, and it just wrote across the screen, "This is not a classroom." So it's these things together. The fact is, it's another tool, it's another way of working. And I think we're at a very exciting point to create a new hybrid and a new way forward where we're bringing together these technologies, but bringing it back to a focus on the individual and their careers and the opportunities for those individuals. I think it comes down to the learner, Iain, what we're trying to achieve. We talk about lifelong learning, we talk about the learner advantage, helping people to understand the changing world and the positive difference they can make. And I think, as committed educators, and you look at the ambition of parents in Pakistan for their children, in helping them to achieve their best. So I think we would bring it back and look at the softer skills, the competencies, and things like the approaches to learning provide the guidance and the self-management skills and thinking, which alongside the learner profile provide, if you like, the DNA and the system of how to understand what's important for that individual child, be they in remote learning, be they in hybrid, or be they in the classroom. And it's really using those things and adapting them, as it works through, that's so important. And I think these are really good opportunities for the future of pedagogy as we think about what this could mean for access and equity in the future, because I think we can build this forward and really kind of break down some of those barriers between classroom and home, and work in greater partnership between the school, the parent, and the student themselves, kind of more holistically. And coming back to the point about assessment, I would say that the modality of assessment may change, and I like the comment from the other panelists. I think what we need to bring into it is performance-based evidence that kind of shows the competence and skills that learner has, but there are different ways of approaching it. And I think it's going to be exciting, kind of helping to reimagine that in the future.
No, thank you, Adrian. Riaz, now a question for you. Now, of course, there's been a lot of talk from parents around the globe, but especially over the last day in Pakistan, because of course, with this online learning, it's, especially for the young kids, parents need to be there. So it's involving, as Adrian said, all stakeholders within education, which has its benefits, but it also causes a lot of stress for the parents who aren't used to it, etc. Now, with the government announcing the possibility that there may only be a 2-week break for teachers to recover over the summer, and parents and students, do you think that's fair to then, give them only a 2-week break, then start the single national curriculum face-to-face? What's your view on that?
I think first question is give them a 2-week break and restart school, and then we talk of the single national curriculum. So it perfect? Perfect? No, but I think if you look at practitioners, if I was talking to my team, and if you look at the last academic year, with the closures that we've had, and with also where kids were coming at a 50% capacity, so half the class will come 3 days and the other half the other 3, we effectively had in some of the provinces around 67 to 75 academic days. So the loss that's cumulated is a significant one. In that event, as the third wave appears to be, inshallah, tapering off, the ability to bring kids back to school quickly, I think, is a good idea. Because when you spoke of learning loss, yes, there's literacy, numeracy, SLOs, all of that is there. But kids generally love being with their friends, love being in that social environment. And I think for them to be coming back to school, to be playing around, to be experiencing that joy, that's something that we at times undervalue. But for a kid, that's essentially very important. So in principle, I agree with the fact that if we can open schools, if we can recommend schools, get back into school, get teachers back, that's a good idea. But I would say then, rather than focusing straight on this that needs to be covered, I would start off with a week of play. Just allow kids to play, just allow them to rediscover. At TCF, we've been doing socio-emotional learning, and for that, we've implemented new things. So for example, when a child comes in the morning, there is a part of a welcome activity in which they tell what's happened at home. At the end of the day, there's a reflection activity. There's a free play time that we've structured in play. So doing those kinds of things to ensure that both the teacher as well as the child can rediscover joy. I would say that ought to be the first priority. And then beyond that, curriculum, single national curriculum, so on and so forth, needs to follow.
Absolutely.
If I may just add to that. Sorry. Yeah. I just also feel that, all of us who are involved in the quote unquote profession of education, I think we take all of this too seriously, in the sense that, there is so much talk about learning loss, while at this point of time, the focus should just be, I think, on psychological safety and well-being of students, because they are young and they are going through something that has not been expected earlier. And if you look at it in the longer scheme of things, I am 31 today, and if I had been 32, had I lost a year in the middle, I would have been, pretty much in the same place. And I think that is what something that would hold true for almost everyone here. So I think there is just a lot of, I feel almost to a point, unnecessary debate about this. We should just be focused on keeping children psychologically safety, focusing just on their well-being so that they see through this, and then everything else can easily be taken care of later, because all of us here believe that we are shaping these students to be lifelong learners, and if we are actually doing good and at that, then learning doesn't stop at grade 12 or when they give their IBDP or ASA level exams. Learning is a lifelong process. So we just need to make sure that identity is retained, and everything else, I think, follows from there.
And, that is something I totally agree with as well. I think, the social emotional well-being of students is, should be the utmost importance to all educators, to parents, at the moment, but just generally in schools. I'm very well aware that, in the Cambridge curriculum with the PHE and also with the IB, with the PSPE, this has been something that we'll probably need to look at on how we actually do this within schools to make sure that we tailor for the well-being of the students, especially with the transition of coming back to school. Because everyone thinks it's hard being at home, but nobody's really thought about that transition, about coming back to school when they've been away for over a year. Yeah. So it's that social connection that you've all mentioned there as well. So it's very interesting. Now, I can see that somebody posted a question, and Sadaf, I can see that you'd be willing to answer this. Now, schools, being at home, it's very much all about screen time. It's sitting in the same position for hours and hours on end. What do you think that is doing to the students' health, both physically but also mentally at the same time?
So that was something that we had to address very early as part of our model, because as an after-school program, and that too online, there is a very heavy kind of burden of being edutainment to being, it's not a captive audience, it's a voluntary audience. And so we have to really make sure that we are not making kids sit. And so part of our lesson plan almost is we break up activities into 15-minute slots. We have a dance at the beginning and at the end of the hour. And that is because we are primarily, doing this with children from the ages of 6 all the way up to 10. And that age group cannot sit still, especially, there are some gender differences, but kids in general just have to move around. And we've also had this dance or movement after every 30 minutes for some of our sessions. What we've also had to really focus on is minimize chalk and talk to 60 seconds or 120 seconds. It's literally, we have teachers put on a timer when they start talking, and they have to stop and then give an exercise or an activity. You have to be really creative, particularly when you're teaching complex concepts like coding, do that, but it's all learning by doing. And when the child is actually doing something, whether they're trying to type or figure it out or drag out different blocks, those activities do allow them to stay engaged. The how you plan your hour actually just becomes really, really important.
Absolutely. And I think, this is something that I was talking with, as Adrian knows, a school in India today, as part of my IB facilitation. And I was saying that, with the planning process, doesn't matter if it's IB, A-level, whatever, we have to remember that they're at home, they're online, and you have to keep changing your activities. You have to keep changing the different programs that you're using to keep the children engaged. So in many respects, it's been a plus point to this whole pandemic, if you can say there is such a thing, is that, teachers, parents and students have been upskilled with different IT skills, etc., that can be used for the future. Now, with this new model of kind of being at home online for many of us around the world, do you think we might ever get to the stage where we can actually see online schools without a building in the future? Do you think parents will ever accept that? Adrian?
That's a big question for me, isn't it? With everything I've said about the bridging the classroom, the home and the community, and the kind of holistic nature of learning. I think it's not an either or, it's a both and kind of response, I think, probably from the IB at this point. I think there is fantastic practice and opportunity in the blend and blended learning, in bringing together the technology, the information, the focus. And you look at the cycle of kind of blended learning from, connecting on a topic, with learners in the same sort of space, bringing people together to focus on something, kick it off, then going into, collaboration in smaller groups on different topics, then, asynchronous checking in questions and dealing with the concepts, and then individual work, and then it's cycling back round. So I think they're different tools, and that helps with, those points about engagement, to say there's a different pace, there's a different flow. But I think the technology, the blend, adds something. I think it adds a lot, and it's really going to drive us forward, because what these, the global platforms and content provide is great connection to the world and to expertise, which is not necessarily available in the school. So what you can do is you can, increase your breadth, your depth. You've got world-class education accessible through your computer, but blended with learners, which are perhaps local to you or mixing with others. So it's, I think it's super exciting. I think fully online schools, is a bit of a stretch. I think one takeaway, for me, for us in a way, is sort of, what we've seen with schools is that the COVID pandemic, in a way, has reinforced the need for the physicality and physical space. And I think what we're doing here is saying, actually, the blend of understanding the physical space and the physical importance of what kids need, together with technology and these global opportunities, is really exciting. Let's drive that forward and move it ahead in education.
Thank you for that, Adrian. And I totally agree, because I do think, with this ever-changing world, with the pandemic, it has led to opportunities for growth, in terms of organizations like the IB, Toddle, it's led for growth with children, etc. And I think, there will be more of a hybrid model coming in the future, as you said rightfully, rather than change to just, virtual school. That's never going to happen in my lifetime, I hope. So look, sadly, that is all we've got time today. I did say to you at the beginning of it, to all of you, that this would probably could be a 4-hour discussion, and I'm sure it could, because we have such esteemed guests here that it really could go on for a long time. Now, I would like to thank all 4 of you on behalf of Beacon House for being here today. It's been a great pleasure. I do hope that we can do this at the next SOT event, which will be happening in November of this year also. So we will be in touch, and thank you. So I have to just say one final thing, that on behalf of our key sponsor, UBL, again, we would like to thank all of you for being part of the Beacon House from Room to Zoom, the changing landscape of education. Thank you to everyone who's been watching, and please make sure you leave your feedback as well. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thanks, Iain.
Thank you, Iain. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.